The final thud of earth hitting the coffin sounded like a door slamming shut on everything she had ever known. The morning sky was a canvas of pale, indifferent gray, and the distant church bells seemed to be counting down the seconds of her old life. Mourners, with their long faces and hushed whispers, moved like shadows through the cemetery gates. But little Emily stood frozen, her small hand clutching a worn teddy bear. Inside that wooden box was her father, the only parent she had ever truly known. He was the warmth in her world, the voice that chased away nightmares with bedtime stories, the gentle hands that wiped away her tears, and the one who had made a solemn promise that no matter what, she would never, ever be alone. Life, however, has a cruel way of breaking the most sacred promises. As the last shovels of dirt fell upon his final resting place, Emily's world didn't just crack, it shattered into silent, invisible pieces. Her eyes, swollen and red from a night spent crying into her pillow, were now dry. She had no tears left. She didn't understand yet that her pain was a vast ocean and she had only waded into the shallows. Friends and neighbors murmured about the tragedy, about how unfair fate could be to such a small child. But just a few feet behind her, a different kind of silence lingered. Her stepmother stood there, a cold, impatient smile playing on her lips, hidden from the others. Dressed in perfect, crisp black, she looked the part of the grieving widow. But inside her heart, there was no grief. There was only a dark, simmering resentment that had finally been set free. She had never wanted Emily, seeing her only as a reminder of a life her husband had before her. And now, with him gone, nothing stood in her way. As the funeral service concluded, Emily's teddy bear was damp with the last of her tears. Her stepmother's voice, when it finally came, was not a whisper of comfort, but a shard of ice. "You don't belong here anymore." The day dragged on, the sun finally breaking through the clouds as the last of the mourners drove away, leaving condolences that felt empty and hollow. Emily, swallowed by a plain cream dress that hung on her fragile frame, was dragged back to the large, imposing house that had once been her sanctuary. It no longer felt like home. The air was cold, the familiar scent of her father's pipe tobacco replaced by something sterile and unwelcoming. Her stepmother did not waste a single moment. With a fury that seemed to have been stored up for years, she stormed into Emily's room. Clothes were ripped from drawers, books swept from shelves, and everything was stuffed carelessly into a battered old suitcase. It was then tossed onto the driveway as if Emily herself was nothing more than garbage to be discarded. The little girl's voice was a tiny, broken thing as she pleaded, "Please, Mommy, forgive me." She didn't know what she had done wrong, but a desperate part of her believed that, if she just said the right words, her stepmother's heart might soften. But there was no heart to soften. Instead, a bucket of shockingly cold water was poured over her head, drenching her from head to toe. The icy liquid seeped through her dress, and her new tears mixed with the cold droplets streaming down her cheeks. She shivered, not just from the cold, but from the raw cruelty of the act. Passers-by slowed their walk, whispering amongst themselves, but no one stepped forward. A man across the street looked on, his face a mask of pity, before shaking his head and hurrying away, as if the sight was too much to carry. Emily's stepmother let out a short, satisfied smirk and slammed the front door shut. The sound echoed down the quiet street, a final, definitive declaration. Emily was left kneeling on the wet pavement, clutching her teddy bear, her few belongings spilled from the open suitcase beside her. The sun was bright now, the world alive with the cheerful song of birds and the warmth of a summer afternoon. Yet for Emily, it was the coldest, darkest day she had ever experienced. Just as the last ounce of hope began to fade from her small heart, a sleek black car pulled up silently at the edge of the driveway. The passenger door opened, and a man in a sharp, expensive suit stepped out. He was tall and carried an air of authority, yet his eyes, as they fell on the small, shivering girl, were softened by a deep, profound empathy. His name was Alexander, a millionaire businessman whose name was known throughout the town. but whose face was rarely seen. He had been on his way to a crucial meeting, his mind occupied with numbers and contracts, when he saw the scene unfolding. A child, soaked and abandoned, her head bowed in humiliation while her life was scattered on the concrete. Something deep inside him, a long-forgotten memory of his own lonely childhood after his mother had passed, snapped. He remembered the sting of rejection, the feeling of being unwanted by those who were supposed to care for him. Without a second thought, he started toward her. Emily lifted her head, her vision blurred by tears as his footsteps grew closer. For a fleeting, magical moment, she thought it might be her father, that it was all a terrible dream, and he had come back to save her. But it was Alexander. He knelt beside her, completely ignoring the puddle of water that was soaking the knees of his expensive trousers. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and his voice was firm, yet filled with a compassion she hadn't heard all day. "This ends here," he said, his words a solemn vow. "No one will ever treat you like this again." The promise hung in the air, solid and real. Hearing the commotion, the stepmother flung the door open again, her face contorted with rage. She began to shout insults at Alexander, calling Emily a worthless burden, and insisting she wanted nothing more to do with the child. Alexander didn't flinch. He stood to his full height and looked her directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "If you can abandon a child moments after burying her father, then you don't deserve the title of mother. I will take her. From this day forward, she is no longer unwanted." A collective gasp went through the small crowd of neighbors that had gathered to watch. The cruel stepmother froze, her angry words dying in her throat. She realized she could not fight this man, not because of his obvious wealth, but because of the unshakable conviction in his voice. With a frustrated huff, she spun around and retreated into the house, slamming the door one last time. For Emily, that sound no longer meant rejection. It meant freedom. Alexander carefully picked up her spilled clothes, tucked the teddy bear safely under his arm, and then took Emily's small, trembling hand in his. For the first time since she had stood by that graveside, she felt a tiny flicker of warmth ignite in her chest. Together they walked toward the black car, leaving the house that had become a prison of cruelty behind them forever. The days that followed were a gentle journey out of a dark place. Emily was haunted by nightmares, often waking up in a cold sweat, her cries echoing in the large, quiet mansion. She was terrified that she would be abandoned again. But Alexander was endlessly patient. He hired the best tutors and bought her beautiful clothes. But more importantly, he gave her the things money could not buy: his time, his attention, and his unwavering love. He would sit by her bedside until she fell back asleep. He would read her stories just like her father used to, and he would remind her every single day that she was wanted, that she was home. Slowly, like a flower turning toward the sun, Emily began to heal. Her laughter, at first a small, hesitant sound, returned, filling the grand hallways with life. The light came back into her eyes, and the child who once knelt weeping on a cold driveway learned how to smile again without fear. The town that had once looked away now watched in awe. The whispers were no longer about cruelty, but about a miracle of compassion. They saw how Alexander, a man who had everything, valued a single, forgotten child above all else. They saw how Emily, once discarded like a broken doll, blossomed into a vibrant symbol of resilience and hope. Months later, on a bright, clear afternoon, Emily stood before her father's grave once more. This time she wasn't crying. She carefully placed a bouquet of his favorite flowers on the stone. She whispered softly, telling him all about her new life, telling him not to worry, because she was safe now. She was loved. Alexander stood a few feet behind her, giving her the space she needed, but close enough to be her anchor. As she finished, she turned and slipped her small hand into his. In that moment, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing them both in a warm, golden light. Her father was gone, but Emily knew he would be happy. She had finally found a new home, not in a house made of bricks and stone, but in the safe and caring heart of the man standing beside her.